73 seconds. That's how long it took for one of America's most trusted spacecraft to fall apart in front of the entire world. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not anymore. The Space Shuttle program was built to prove that the United States had mastered spaceflight, that launches like this were no longer a gamble. But on January 28, 1986, something went wrong. And the worst part? They had already seen the warning signs.
For years, America had been doing something no other country in history had ever mastered, launching into space, returning safely, and doing it again as if it were becoming routine. The Space Shuttle program wasn't just a technological achievement, it was a statement. It proved that the United States could turn one of the most dangerous environments known to man into something controlled, repeatable, almost predictable. And Challenger was part of that promise, a spacecraft that had already flown successfully multiple times, trusted by engineers, trusted by NASA, and trusted by a country that had learned to believe that spaceflight was no longer a gamble, but a system. That belief is what made this mission different, because on January 28, 1986, millions of people were not just watching another launch, they were watching something symbolic. A teacher, Krista McAuliffe, was on board. A civilian, someone who represented the idea that space was no longer reserved for elite astronauts, but something larger, something national. Classrooms across the country had televisions turned on. Children were waiting. Teachers were watching one of their own leave Earth. This wasn't just another mission anymore. It was a moment designed to inspire. But behind that moment, something else was happening. Quietly, away from the cameras, engineers had been raising concerns. Not about the shuttle as a whole, but about a specific component that had shown signs of weakness before. The solid rocket boosters, the massive engines that helped lift the shuttle off the ground, relied on rubber seals known as O-rings. These seals were designed to contain extreme pressure and heat, expanding instantly to prevent any gases from escaping. And under normal conditions, they worked. But not all conditions were normal. The night before the launch, temperatures in Florida dropped to levels that had never been tested under real launch conditions. Engineers from Morton Thiokol, the company responsible for the boosters, understood exactly what that meant. Rubber changes in the cold. It hardens, it reacts slower, it doesn't seal as quickly as it should. And that delay, even if measured in fractions of a second, could be enough to allow superheated gases to escape. They had seen warning signs before. Minor damage, erosion, nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to understand that the margin for error was already thinner than it should have been. What followed was not panic, but discussion. Long, technical, structured discussion. Data was reviewed, charts were presented. Engineers argued that the risk was real and that the safest decision was to delay the launch. But the data wasn't perfect. It didn't prove failure, it suggested it. And inside an organization under pressure, that distinction matters, because slowly the question changed. It stopped being whether the shuttle was safe to launch and became whether there was enough proof to justify stopping it. By the time that conversation ended, the recommendation had shifted. The launch was approved, not because the risk had disappeared, but because it hadn't been definitively proven. And that subtle difference, that shift in mindset, would become one of the most studied decisions in engineering history. The next morning, the cold was undeniable. Ice had formed on parts of the launch structure. Engineers saw it. Cameras captured it. Concerns were raised again, but at that point, everything was already in motion. The countdown continued. At 11:38 a.m., Challenger lifted off the pad in a plume of fire and smoke, exactly as it had done before. Powerful, controlled, almost familiar. To anyone watching, it looked like another successful launch. But less than a second after liftoff, something went wrong. One of the O-rings on the right solid rocket booster failed to seal properly. For a brief moment, a small jet of flame escaped from the joint. It was subtle, almost invisible. And then as pressure built inside the booster, the material shifted and temporarily sealed the gap. For a few seconds, it looked like the problem had corrected itself, but it hadn't. It had only delayed the failure. As Challenger climbed higher, Aerodynamic forces increased. At around 58 seconds into the flight, the shuttle encountered strong wind shear. The structure flexed under stress. That temporary seal broke. The flame returned, this time stronger, more focused, cutting through the metal structure of the booster. It wasn't an explosion, it was a breach, a precise, violent failure exactly where engineers had feared it might happen. 15 seconds later, that jet of flame reached the external fuel tank. Inside it were liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, stored under extreme conditions. The moment the structural integrity of that tank was compromised, the system failed completely. In less than a second, the shuttle lost its structure. The tank ruptured, the booster separated. Challenger was torn apart in the sky. What millions of people saw was not a traditional explosion, but a sudden, chaotic disintegration. Trails of smoke splitting apart against the clear blue sky. Silence turning into confusion. Confusion turning into realization. Because what had just happened was something the country was no longer used to seeing. Failure on live television in a system that was supposed to have mastered risk. The investigation that followed would go far beyond the hardware. Led by the Rogers Commission, it revealed that the technical cause, the O-ring failure, was only part of the story. The deeper issue was cultural. Over time, small anomalies had become accepted. Minor damage had been normalized. Warnings had been acknowledged but not acted on with the urgency they deserved. The system had slowly adapted to risk instead of eliminating it. That is what made this disaster different. It wasn't a mystery. It wasn't an unpredictable failure. It was a chain of decisions, each one understandable on its own, but catastrophic when combined. And in the end, it forced NASA to confront something uncomfortable, that even the most advanced systems ever built are still vulnerable, not just to engineering limits, but to human judgment. The Challenger disaster changed how America approached spaceflights. It grounded the shuttle program for years. It forced a complete reevaluation of safety protocols, decision-making processes, and engineering authority. And while the loss was permanent, the response was equally defining, because the same country that built the system and made the mistake also rebuilt it with a deeper understanding of what space demands. And that is why this mission still matters. Not just because of how it failed, but because of what it revealed. That mastery of space is not about eliminating risk entirely, but about respecting it every single time. And the moment that respect fades, even slightly, space reminds you exactly who was in control.